Coming up on Over a Barrel, some uncertainty in the economy right now. What kind of an impact is that going to have on crude oil prices as well as gasoline? And will those tariffs kick back in next month regarding Canada and the crude oil prices coming across the border for the Midwest? That and a whole lot more on Over a Barrel, which starts right now. Well, welcome to the program. He's Patrick. I'm Matt. Thanks for joining us. And for those of you listening and watching and whatnot, obviously make sure you like and subscribe, submit your questions, all kinds of stuff going on. Patrick, let's get right to it. We have some uncertainty in the economy. We have the threat of tariffs possibly kicking back into effect, keeping in mind the President Trump only giving a 30-day pause on implementing tariffs across Canada and Mexico, which would impact crude oil coming across the border from Canada, especially. So we have a lot of stuff that we are monitoring here at Over a Barrel. So let's talk about some of the uncertainty right now. I'm seeing stories from different news outlets, business news outlets, market news outlets that would indicate that there's definitely some uncertainty there. And they're citing places like the University of Michigan and other places which would indicate that there's a little bit of a jitter, a little nervous jitter going on right now as to whether or not things are going to get better or get worse. So let's kind of break that down just a little bit. How is the economy looking with demand and other aspects? And let's start talking what your assessments are.
Well, Matt, to your point, headlines indicating the University of Michigan, which comes out with a monthly consumer sentiment index. The index fell to 64.7 in January. It's a pretty big decline. That sentiment index is basically a measure of how people like you and I feel about the economy, how we're going to spend. So it's a pretty significant psychological index to know how people are feeling. And as I mentioned, for January, that plummeted by 10%. According to the CNBC article, it was a steeper drop than expected. Consumers fearing higher inflation ahead. The 5-year inflation outlook in the survey was 3.5%, the highest since 1995. So, stock market plummeting today, although it hasn't every day in the last couple of weeks. But I think there's a lot of folks on edge, Matt. We're consumers. How are you feeling about the economy? Obviously, there's been a lot of uncertainty about what's been happening, Trump's administration, tariffs on, tariffs off, Russia on, Russia off, right? There's been a lot to digest from the administration. So, is this something that concerns you? I mean, give us your pulse.
So it's not just concerning. I'll be honest with you. I've checked with a lot of my clients that are a variation of either marketing clients, video production, or whatever the case may be. And yeah, we are fielding a lot of questions. There's no question about that. And I'm going to tell you that a lot of our clients really have a great spectrum across the board with political personal beliefs, whether they're for or against. We have a mixture, and I like it that way. In all honesty, we try to make sure that we just simply market products, personal politics aside. But the key of the matter is there seems to be a consensus among no matter what's taking place and no matter who was supported in their mind. There's some jittery nerves at this point. One of the case in points that I have been addressing in multiple avenues, keeping in mind a lot of small businesses across this country receive federal grants in one form or another. A lot of those have been frozen, and those small businesses are now beginning to financially struggle because they were counting on the release of those funds. They were awarded the grants, but now all of a sudden they're not there. So the R word is a fear point that multiple people have begun talking to me about, and my team of people on this side of things. And there's just a lot of that uncertainty, to be honest with you. I don't want to go into any other major discussion regarding all of that, obviously, to protect everybody involved. But the key of the matter is there's some most definite uncertainty at this point, regardless of political views. Facts are facts, dollars are dollars. And at the end of the day, the bank account is what speaks when it comes to business. So, there's some concern.
Yeah, a lot of federal employees obviously out of a job, right? The Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk, has been letting a lot of folks go. So, if you're in DC, one of the headlines that I saw, that real estate values are plummeting in the DC metro area because people are simply packing up if they don't have a job. So a lot of uncertainty. And when you rip the Band-Aid off, when you let so many people go, when there's so many repercussions, it's going to be hard to fully grasp exactly what can transpire very quickly, right? If that's going to spread, if the lack of confidence is going to emanate through much of business. Like you, I sat down with a buddy who owns a business in West Michigan ahead of Christmas. A lot of concerns, a lot of business deals happening ahead of the Trump administration because tariffs could heavily impact so many US businesses, trying to make business decisions that reduce the effect of tariffs. And keep in mind, the toll on Americans as well, their spending
Mhm.
habits. Obviously, the concerns that business owners like yourself and my friend were stating also are rampant amongst Americans who obviously this consumer sentiment gauge fell. So, while I think there's a lot of people that may be optimistic over the years ahead, there's a lot of the reality of, such profound changes happening so quickly.
Yeah, I think the main key is that optimism has gone to somewhat, at least for the moment, short term concern over what some of these hiccups may be, and how big of a hiccup it may be, and how
Yeah.
long that's going to last. I will openly say, even when I once worked in the news media for 20 plus years, very few people, I think I'm safe in saying this, very, very, very few people, no matter what the political stripe of your belief happens to be, felt like the federal government was perfect and didn't require some tweaking. I think there's almost nobody that I know of that thought, yeah, the government's perfect, it's A-okay. The main concern that I'm having is, sometimes you need to use a scalpel instead of a meat cleaver. One of the clients made that a point to me that you may or may not agree with, or if you're hearing or watching this. But the key is, that's creating a lot of jittery nerves at this point, like what's happening. And that uncertainty, if the generalized consumer comes about, then you start wondering, okay, is that going to have an impact where people stop spending money because they don't know what the future holds, which is where they're all concerned about what may take place. Now, all of that being said, if people pull back on spending, pull back on vacation plans, pull back on different things
Right.
because of uncertainty, what kind of a pressure is that going to place on things like gasoline and crude oil? I mean, I think we've been doing this long enough, and I've been interviewing you for years prior to that. It would seem that may temporarily bring prices down, or at least stabilize. The traditional spring upward trend of
Yeah.
prices may not be quite as intense. I mean, talk to us about how all of that may shake out if things for the next couple of months, need to settle down, and we know kind of where things stand.
Well, there's kind of a rush for things to settle down because once issues do settle down, then Americans get a little bit more, familiarity. They're not as worried that, hey, there's so much happening, there's so much in the news cycle. To add one more data point to the nervousness that we're talking about, home sales for January dropped sharply as prices for new homes hit an all-time high for January. The median price for a home in January almost $397,000. That's up 5% from January last year. So, obviously there's been a lot of coverage too about the affordability of new homes. More people are renting, and I think in the backdrop, Matt, a lot of the data that we're looking at indicates that consumers have record credit card debts now that's well above $1 trillion.
Oh yeah.
And so that's going to come to roost here, especially amidst job losses. If companies are slowing down purchases because of uncertainty from the administration, that's not going to be great either. So, that would obviously then carry over to what we're paying at the pump. And right now, that's relatively affordable. And we've said on the program before, a good economy generally means higher gas prices, and a poor economy generally will mean lower gas prices because so much of the economy is tied to the consumption of oil. If you're doing well, you're going to be driving, you're going to be taking trips, you're going to go, see friends, going out to eat, you're going to be consuming gasoline in the process, you're going to be potentially vacationing, you're going to be flying places, you're going to maybe have a job, and so you're going to be mobile. And so that means jet fuel demand, right? And if you're doing well, you're also going to be buying more, you're going to be shopping more, more
Yep.
consumption of goods. And so that means more diesel consumption. So generally, in a healthy economy, you see strong gasoline demand, you see strong diesel demand, you see strong jet fuel demand. Now, there can be year over year comparisons, right? Like um, airlines are becoming more fuel efficient. So there's that. Airlines are still doing really well, but discretionary income, if that starts to decline, airlines are probably the first where you'll start to notice a drop in spending. But generally speaking, Matt, the interesting thing here is we're now we're in late February. We have really yet to see the biggest part of the spring rally in gas prices really kick off. Normally, it starts by this time of year. We've seen gas prices start to increase this time of year, but a lot of that's been led by refinery issues in California. The price of oil still is under pressure. So,
Yeah.
that's, I'm kind of waiting here and any day waiting for a sign that gas prices are going to start their seasonal rise. But so far, we haven't seen it. It probably will start in the next couple of weeks, unless there's some more exceptions regarding the economy and potential headlines.
So let me throw this out there. I know you mentioned home prices and sales and whatnot for the month of January. Let me throw out an idea to toss around. Could some of that have been because we had a really nasty January when it comes to weather, and nobody wants to buy a house when you've got 2 feet of snow on the ground and it's -7? Do you think that could be a portion of why some of the trends in January appeared the way that they did?
Yeah, sure. And some of this data is seasonally adjusted. So, yeah, weather can be a factor in Americans buying homes, but it's not a huge factor because of people that are finding jobs, people that are losing jobs are still going to be moving, right? So it's not a huge hill to climb. Wanted to add one other interesting data point here. Walmart is a huge staple of spending. Walmart's earnings yesterday came out and they were below expectations. So that is a bit of a flashing amber light, right? A
It's a
little bit
litmus
of
test.
yeah, exactly. A bit of a cautionary tale. As a result, Walmart stock has fallen from about $104 all the way down to about $94, which that's a bit more of a 10% drop in the last 2 days. So yeah, Walmart is a benchmark of the strength of consumers and their spending. Now, interestingly enough, Amazon, I think, outpaced Walmart in
For the
revenue
first
for
time
the first
ever.
time.
Yeah.
So, that's also a sign of shifting consumers. But I think Walmart and what their stock performance is can act still as a bit of a canary in the coal mine. That hey, maybe things aren't as great as we're expecting because consumers are still being impacted. Inflation is still out there, right? Eggs right now are through the roof. By the way, I think it's really interesting that a lot of Americans that thought a president had power over economics are still making excuses now for why the price of eggs are higher. They're saying it was administration. Look, folks, there's not as many chickens laying
Right.
eggs because of the avian flu, right? A president is not really laying chickens. He's not responsible for egg prices. So,
What? There's no coop on the backyard of the White House? What? What?
where I'm in Tampa, by the way, that's a great idea because a lot of people apparently here
They do
have
chickens.
chickens laying
Yeah,
their
they
own
do.
lone eggs. But eventually there will be improvement there. But it does take time.
I
So
paid $7 for a dozen earlier this week.
And by the way, I think there's going to be a future feature in the Gas Buddy app that we may be able to help folks find cheaper eggs, because I think eggs are more the concern right now than gasoline in a lot of these markets, unless you're on the West Coast, where, by the way, Matt, if anyone that's been paying attention as we've been talking about it, the Bay Area, that is San Francisco, over the last month, whew, that's not a place you want to be to fill your tank up. The Bay Area, some areas of Northern California, as I look at it, up 60 to 80 cents a gallon in the last 30 days. Um, that's the seasonality, Matt. That could happen in other areas, although probably not to that degree. Keep in mind, California has but nine refineries left. By the end of this year, they will be down to 8 refineries. And so,
So who gets to make up the loss of what that refinery was producing at that point?
no one. That's why prices
Oh.
skyrocket so much more and more, is not no one, but Matt, California is a bit of a petro island. There's the Panama Canal. That's a little bit, it takes, imagine getting product from Texas to California is actually a lot more challenging than you might believe. Now, there's a pipeline that does run from Texas to Arizona into Phoenix, that does connect to refineries. But yeah, it's not easy to get California gasoline into California from Gulf Coast refineries. There's no pipelines, but eventually, the relief valve for California is Asia, places like South Korea, Japan, Singapore.
It just
That
doesn't, like when
it
you
comes.
stop,
It takes a couple of weeks. Yeah, that's the only relief mechanism now. And
it just, from a consumer standpoint, the logic behind what you just said, I recognize you're right. But at the same time, it's like, wait, it's much easier to get crude oil slash fuel slash whatever from Asia than it is just to simply build a pipeline from Texas to California. And I mean, you see the mentality that I'm trying to
Well,
build there. It's
in a
like,
pipeline, you build it, it's going to take 5 years at least, right? The
yeah,
permitting adds another year or two at least. Maybe it'll be simplified, but who still is building that? Like, you know, Texas and Louisiana, those refineries there, they're already, they have ports. They can sell their products to the international market. It's just that the Panama Canal and the toll essentially that they charge for the Panama Canal is problematic. And the other problem, Matt, is something Americans don't think about. If you ship things like gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel from the U.S. to the U.S., it needs to be on a U.S. built ship. It needs to be on a U.S. crude ship, and that's called the Jones Act, and that's where a lot of the problem comes from. Is that it's incredibly expensive because we're a developed nation. Building things here is more expensive than it is, say, building in China, which is why there's so many factories in China. But that's part of the problem when you ship U.S. product to the U.S. You have to use U.S. built carriers and U.S. flagged crews. So that's, in building a pipeline, again, that's not easy. But, you know, for your point, there's been a huge population boom in areas like Arizona. So who knows? Maybe there will be some desire to build a pipeline or some expansion of a pipeline that would deliver gasoline into California, because California continues to shutter refineries. More like the political landscape there is behind refineries shutting
yeah.
down, is because it just doesn't make sense to operate a refinery in a place where you don't have control. So, all that aside, Matt, it's again, consumer sentiment. If it slows down, if you start to see gas prices declining this time of year, or if you fail to see the launch and gas prices that you normally see this time of year, that's a bit problematic. That's telling you something's quite not right with the economy.
Yeah, you actually, at this point, given the dynamics of how just the market itself is structured for fuel, it's concerning to you as an analyst if you don't see prices on the increase between now and Memorial Day or April or whatever the case may be. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so comment on that. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, it's very accurate. The only time we have not seen gas prices rise between, say, winter or late winter and sometime in spring, late spring, has been 2020. We all know what happened in 2020. So, to draw a parallel, the only time gas prices haven't gone up in the spring was during the pandemic, when millions of Americans were parking their cars, when they were losing jobs, when loved ones were in hospitals, or not surviving COVID, right? So that's not really a parallel you want to draw. But having said that, if prices don't go up somewhere in the ballpark of 20 to 65 cents between now and Memorial Day, I mean, for those regular listeners, you've known we've been speaking that this is coming. If it doesn't happen, there's something bad happening in the economy that is leading to lackluster demand.
Yeah. There's so much going on out there. Moving on to just a moment here of that's also connected. Let's talk about, I teased it at the beginning, tariffs. Let's talk about that for just a moment, because there was a 30-day pause placed on some of these tariffs. The key for me is looking at things, and I'm looking at it from probably a more of a layman's terms, a consumer-driven term here. But if you as a country are the main manufacturer of things, like we were in the 1990s, 1980s, 70s, and so on, a tariff might make more sense. But if your economy is so intertwined that an American-made car, let's say, Kentucky, where I'm at now, Toyota has multiple other car brands have their manufacturing plants here. But they can't make the vehicle here until they get parts from, let's say, right, America, Mexico, and Canada, and other places. And there is no flipping of a switch and say, well, in 30 days, I can fix that. It does not work that way. You can't mass produce something like that.
If only it did.
So does a tariff of something of epic proportions that the current administration is proposing, let me rephrase that, has already proposed, was set to put into place, and only put a 30-day pause on, which means next month that pause will be up. Will we see them? Will we not? I guess we have to wait and see. But the key question is, does it even make logical sense at this point?
I mean, Trump's got his own agenda. Logical. I guess that's kind of his call on what he sees. He's obviously been very ardently arguing against the end of fentanyl or however it's being brought through the United States, and of course, illegal
Yep.
immigration has been top of mind for him, and he's been utilizing the threat of tariffs to get things he wants. So he's been using tariffs as a threat that gets negotiating power. We'll have to see. I mean, we are starting to come up on that month here pretty quick. So far, I haven't heard any new developments, but it seems like he was somewhat happy with how Canada and Mexico both responded. So, tariffs are still a thorny issue that could be a surprise that's looming here in the weeks ahead. And if there is a development, of course, you and I will cover it. But
Yeah.
and again, highlighting uncertainty in the economy stretches to the very highest levels. If businesses don't have clarity on what the cost of doing business is going to look like, that doesn't really inspire confidence to have their companies grow and to be in a strong place, right? And that's probably funneling down to consumers like you and I, who are probably a little bit uncertain about our own futures, the futures of the economy, the future of the country. So uncertainty creates risk. It creates a little bit of anxiousness that may slow things down. We'll have to see if things improve, but for now, we are coming into the time of year where traditionally prices go up. You've already seen it on the West Coast. Some of the season's lowest prices. I've noticed a lot of folks in my mentions on social media been talking about big price increases in Texas. A lot of these areas still, if you're listening, if you're not familiar with price cycling, when prices shoot up drastically 40 to 50 cents, there's a lot of folks in social media that have been saying, hey, what's going on in Texas? What's going on in Kansas City? What's going on with these massive overnight increases? Do yourself a favor. We've spoken on the program here before, but if you're listening and you're curious why there's these huge 50 to 40 to 50 cent jumps and you're not in the West Coast, I want you to Google something, price cycling. And if you really want a good news story, WTHR, who's a TV station in Indianapolis, did kind of like a week long story, Matt, watching daily gas price fluctuations. And reporter's name is Bob Segal, did a really nice piece on price cycling. And that gives you a lot of insight. And price cycling is happening in more and more markets, as we've spoken about, right? This is becoming more and more prevalent across the country. And if you know what it is, you'll be able to identify basically the best times to fill up. So, a little bit of education here, a little bit of homework for our listeners is if you're not familiar with price cycling, check it out. If you have any questions about what it is, or if the last increase you saw, you're not sure what it was, throw us a mention.
Yeah,
Over a barrel
definitely.
Matt on X, and I'm Gas Buddy Guy on X. So, we'd love to hear from you on what you're experiencing and be happy to delve into the woods on, why prices went up in your neck of the woods. So again, reach out to us. I'm a Gas Buddy Guy on X, and he's Over a Barrel Matt on X. And you can always email us if you're not on Twitter or X, you can shoot us an email to podcast@gasbuddy.com. But Matt, and wrapping up, a little bit of uncertainty here. We'll have to see how the next couple weeks shapes up. Normally, gas prices go up, but would love to hear from you guys. What you're seeing in your neck of the woods, leave us a comment. But Matt, why don't you wrap us up?
Yeah, definitely. So price points at this point, next 7 days, very quickly, you're thinking will move in which direction?
Overall, I think most areas will probably either be stable or net increase. The price cycling markets may drop a little bit, but most of the country is probably going to hold stable or edge higher.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to be keeping a watchful eye on quite literally just about everything out there, and there's a lot taking place. We are not lacking for entertainment,
No,
news,
definitely
culture,
not.
you name it, we've got it. We are not lacking at all with regard to all of that. And if you see something, I just actually had somebody send me. They did not know we were in the middle of recording a podcast, but they sent it to me, knowing that we do a weekly podcast, and I sent it to you just now. Apparently, a Phoenix gas station have mixed up I guess some fuel in what was placed into the tanks, or the tanker driver or something, and is causing a lot of car damage as well in that area as well. Apparently, they put the wrong fuel in the wrong spot.
Well,
So
that does happen. Why don't we
yeah,
cover that next week on
yeah,
misfueling? That's a great idea for another episode. And
we'll
if
do
you
it.
have any ideas for an episode, like it just happened, shoot Matt a social media message or shoot me one or shoot us an email and we'll talk
Literally
about that.
just popped up not
Love
60
it.
seconds ago. I'm like, oh, that's just entertaining. They didn't know we were in the process of recording one. So thanks, Gary. I appreciate it. And so that's going to pretty much wrap up just about everything on this particular episode. So much more to discuss in future episodes. It's a very exciting time that we live in with regard to all of that. And I'm just going to say thanks for joining us, and we'll talk again coming up really soon.
So long.